All right. How you doing? Doing good, Kurt? Hey. Huh? I was just getting everyone's attention, setting the mic up. So Kurt is going to be our master debater here tonight. He will be the proctor of the debate. I'll make funny faces at you. And a team of your peers, that is to say, Gigi, you want to judge? Chris, Kurt, and Gigi will judge. What? No August this time. Unless you want to, August. If you really want to, you can. It's cool.
You want to?
I don't care. Do we both?
Nah,
I'll actually pay attention this time.
All right, anyway. So Kurt, go ahead and get us started.
Alright, so I'm going to tell you how much time you have, and then I'm going to say
1 minute remaining.
There you go.
Because whenever we did the bell thing, everybody always freaked out. So I'm just going to interrupt you obnoxiously. It's going to be great. Any objections? That's okay. They will.
That's cool. So is everyone familiar with the time periods? You guys
3 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes?
Yeah, something like that.
Affirmative constructive is 6 minutes for the record.
Yeah.
I get 6 minutes.
So team affirmative, can you raise your hand? There you go. Good spirit, Eugene. And we got team negative over here. Welcome.
Native Nancy's over there.
Represent most of the internet.
Are you ready? Everybody ready? Thumbs up. Ready?
Ready as always.
Toy fighter. Oh, I think they're ready.
I think they're ready. Alright, so affirmative constructive, as soon as you start talking, I'm going to interrupt you obnoxiously. 1 minute left.
Don't be
Sounds wonderful.
don't be a toy fighter.
Can't help it.
I think it's
You're so far away.
No, only 1 minute. Oh, sorry.
Testing, works. Okay. Let me start by telling you a story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved to play video games, and there was this new game that she was so excited to play. Everyone was talking about it, and it was sure to win Game of the Year. She saved every penny of her hard-earned allowance to buy this new video game. But video games are expensive, and her savings was not enough. She begged her parents to lend her money, but of course they told her she had to earn it. They made her do extra chores, but she did not mind, though, because this meant she could buy her new game. So she went to the store to pre-order the game she wanted. Then she waited and waited and waited until finally it was released. She was so happy. She rushed to the store, paid the $60 for the game, and dashed home to play it. As soon as the game started, it was awful. The graphics were terrible, the game mechanics were completely illogical, and the storyline was non-existent. It was a complete failure. Its price dropped within days of its release. The game that she had put all her hard-earned money into was now not even worth the gas money to return it. This story may be fictional, but it is based on real events. Every year, there's at least one game that follows this pattern. Companies pour millions of dollars into games that once released fails to live up to their expectations. More often than not, this will leave a company in ruins because in the game industry, it is all about your reputation. A company is only as good as the next game they create, and one bad game could end it all. Episodic games offer a much safer alternative to this vicious cycle. By breaking a game into smaller and more manageable pieces, it allows designers to essentially test how their game will fare in the market. This process of trial by fire has worked for TV series for years. A network will create and air a few episodes of a new show. If the ratings are good, they make more. If the ratings are bad, they trash it and move to the next great idea. This same method can be applied to episodic video games. If the first episode sells well, then that means the people enjoyed the game and would like to play more. On the other hand, if the game does not sell, it can be determined a failure and the designer can move on to the next idea. For a game designer, it is better to learn where the mistakes are in the beginning than to get all the way to the end and realize the whole idea was doomed from the start. Furthermore, episodic games are much cheaper to create and they can be produced much faster than traditional video games. The reason for this is that episodic video games have less content than traditional video games. This reduces stress on the developers because there's a decreased level of financial investment in the game, which means that if the game fails, it is less of a loss to the company. On the other hand, if the game is a success, then the money made from the sales of the first episode can be used to create the second one. Now, it is not just a benefit to the designer, it also lowers the cost for the consumers. Just like any other product out there, the price of a video game is determined by the cost it takes to create, market, and ship it. With traditional games, this cost is very high, which is the reason that the price of a new game is so expensive. Now, on the other side of this is episodic games, which are cheaper to create. This filters down to the customer in the form of a lower price tag on their video games. Some worry that because the games are cheaper and made in less time, that these games are not as good in quality. This is not always the case. The fact that episodic games are broken up and not solid like traditional video games is actually an advantage. The storyline of a traditional video game, if it has one, is decided before the game is even released. This means the story cannot easily be changed or modified once it is in the hands of the players. In this situation, the players have no control over what happens in the storyline of the game. With episodic games, the opposite is true. Players can influence the direction of the story because it is not yet set in stone. This helps the player to develop more of a connection to the game. Also, if the players do not like where the game is going, they can tell the designer, who can redirect the story into a more pleasant direction. Overall, episodic games provide much better stories because they are very story-driven, unlike traditional games like Call of Duty, which focus more on action than storyline.
1 minute remaining.
If the game the girl in the story wanted so badly had been an episodic game, that it is possible that its failure may not have been as extreme, and the girl would not have wasted as much money on a story she did not enjoy. Most likely, the girl would have played the first episode, realized the game was not for her, and moved on, with little cost to her. On the other side, the designer would have discovered the game was a flop, and possibly gone back to the drawing board with little financial loss. In the end, it would have worked out nicely for both of them.
All right, thank you.
So hold on, pause to the end.
Yeah, uproarious audience. Take it down a notch. Thank you.
All right.
Exactly 1 notch.
Can we get about a minute and a half?
Sure.
Okay.
Good use of your time, by the way.
I didn't hear it.
I applaud. Considering nobody else uses it. We use it. Yeah, you. It's like the very end when I remind them, like, check the 3 minutes. And you're like,
Take 3 minutes.
it's not worth much now with the crystallization of all of them.
I'm going to remind the judges that any good points they bring up in their crystallization, even if it saves their whole argument, be ignored. You know, like that happened last week.
Somebody's salty. Are we supposed to be the commentators that fill the time during the timeouts in the game?
I'm always the commentator.
Who's the straight man and who's the color man?
You can be both. Just argue with yourself.
I don't know, right? Which one am I? I guess I'm the color man. I guess. I could do either one. I prefer the color man. You know who makes a really bad color man? Bill. He's a terrible color man. He's god awful. But he makes a really great straight man.
20 seconds remaining.
My Street Fighter voice is not as good that time.
I thought you were doing Halo.
Yes. Wait.
Time!
Time. You want to take more time? Want to take more time? No?
We got this.
Okay, who's the cross-examiner? Okay. I guess I should say main cross-examiner. You guys can ask any questions as well, but I assume John Steve's going to take the main questions.
Let me know if you guys want to tag in.
Go ahead.
You talked about how games, when they're released episodically, how they could produce a better quality. how would you justify games like The Walking Dead when even they're released on disc, they still have game-breaking glitches that are built into them? How would you justify that?
Is that the problem of the concept of episodic games or the person that made an episodic
It's
game?
directly the problem of episodic games because episodic games work on a time frame, and that's another thing I wanted to ask you. Thanks for bringing that up. With games that use a year-long time frame and have that year to work on it and produce a higher quality game, how does having a strict time restraint, where it's month to month, benefit an episodic game?
Well, where do I start? First thing, if you finished The Walking Dead, which I know you didn't specifically, so you have less knowledge on the subject, we need to first establish
I'd like to get straight to the question, please.
I'm going to. Secondly, it's good because The Walking Dead first started out as a completely different game than what it gradually evolved into. It started as a typical telltale fare of...
I'm going to have to cut you off there. What do you...
need to shut up and let me finish.
I'm going to cut you off because I'm allowed to. Please be quiet when I'm asking questions. How would you justify... Okay, you talked about how risk is smaller, but for indie game developer companies who can't afford to pool all their resources because games like these take a lot of effort and attention, how does that minimize risk for indie game developers like us who don't have that amount of resources to spread out to numerous pilot games?
It's a way to do games that isn't... It's a different way to do it. And by less risk, we mean less risk on the consumer side and the developer side. So instead of having an entire offering, giving them the whole sandwich first, we give them a bit of it. If they don't like the bit we give them, we save everyone time and money.
I'm going to cut you off right there. When episodic games do good, there was actually one called Bone that was a great episodic game, but the developer just decided to drop all its funding for it, and that was the end. How do you justify something like that?
I don't know, I'm not the
They
developer.
actually stated that the reason they dropped Bone was because they did not have the manpower or the financial, the actual money to do both Bone
And I'm going to cut you off. How does that benefit the consumer then? When someone purchases a season pass or something, and say like Half-Life 2, where
1
it's
minute remaining.
3 episodes, it was supposed to be 3 episodes, and only 2 have released.
Again, that's the fault of the company, not the idea of episodic games.
Okay, but the idea of episodic games is a continuation of the series, and it's supposed to be back-to-back.
That's their fault, not ours. Not
Okay.
anyone else's. Not the idea of the episodic games, no, it's their fault.
Okay, so wouldn't you say that a rigorous time schedule can hurt a game then?
If you notice Valve's development schedule, they have no set time for any of their games.
I was referring to the process as a whole.
Right, but why'd you use Valve as an
I also
exception?
used The Walking Dead as an example, who released monthly.
Could you repeat your question?
How does a rigorous time schedule hurt the episodic format?
Hurts? You mean help or hurt? Hurts.
I
Did you
use my
say
wording.
it? Why are you asking me this question? You're the one that's supposed to be pointing out why it does.
Okay, what effect does it have on the episodic format?
Fine. That was fun. So what's next?
Negative constructive and rebuttal, 7 minutes.
So who's going to be your instructor?
Y'all ready for this?
Fantastic.
Yeah, I guess let's use the microphone.
Yeah, that'd be preferable.
You should hold it like a game.
No need to do that. Hold the microphone like a game. That was dumb. All right.
The episodic game format is detrimental to the game industry at large because of the exceptional difficulties in successfully planning and implementing these games into the market. Additionally, the format does not lend itself to the majority of games, devaluing the player's experience. Yes, there are some successful examples of episodic games and successful sequels. But if this format is not used very cautiously, the episodic format could lead to a retrogression in the art of game making. The episodic game format creates many difficulties most game companies are not adequately prepared to deal with, often leading to the game's failure. Because of the extended timeline of creating an entire series and the added variables of dealing with a different market, it's difficult for a company to actually forecast that far ahead and how much it can actually accomplish. This results in incomplete games and loss of the fan base. So previously we cited Valve's Half-Life episodes, which were announced to be released every 6 months originally, and got a lot of hype for that. But in actuality, they were only able to release them every 1 or 2 years. Similarly, when the game Sin's first installments failed to sell adequately, the fans that did buy it were left with a half-finished story and a game that would never be completed. With these games, players are forced to continuously buy new installments to their games. And contrary to the argument that they're cheaper for the player, in the long run, they total up to a heftier price than a single complete game. Maintaining the public's interest is a fine art. How to keep fans excited without coming to hate a game that they were originally excited about can be difficult when you have a long, drawn-out time between sequels. For example, Fez, although this was not an episodic game, this happened to it where it took years for it to actually come out, and by the time it did, its fan base was gone and people completely turned against it. Episodic games must have a faster timeline than normal in order to maintain their interest. To quote Robert Ashley, the game journalist, you have to get 5 times as many previews, 5 times as many reviews, and 5 times as many good blog entries. And you're risking stoking the game boner to the point of blue balls. If a small game company attempts an episodic game, it will likely have to focus on it alone, which forces them to place all their bets on the success of one game, which is especially risky considering that episodic games are already prone to failure. Even if the market is in place for it, and an episodic game series is executed successfully, the format is innately devaluing to the game experience, and by extension, the players. Episodic games are essentially a playthrough TV series. Granted, storytelling is an essential element to successful games, so quality is everything. This style belongs to comic books and TV shows where it came from, and it creates a throwaway mentality. Some game developers do predict that there is a potential for episodic games to take root in the industry in the future, but if so, what will be the long-term effects? If all games devolve into small app-like mobile games and episodes that are free to stretch on as infinitely as The Land Before Time and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or at least it was a trilogy, the full-length masterpieces we have come to love will be a thing of the past. Either the industry will suffer as people lose interest in these disposable games, or our gaming culture will become increasingly app-oriented, causing a vicious cycle of shortening attention spans and cheaper products. The nature of a playthrough series is contrary to the nature of what games were originally intended to be. Problem-solving apparatuses. They were intended to make us think and explore new worlds and to imagine new possibilities. Thank you.
Hold your applause to the
No
end.
applause. Thank you. Thank you, crowd.
Unnecessarily biased, the
We don't need to bias the judges
biased judges.
with your applause.
Berman, are you ready for a cross-examination, or would you like me to answer fair?
No, got everything I need.
You don't have to go
Wait,
to
wait,
standing
say
up.
that first.
I mean,
No, I
he can
want
do
to.
whatever he wants,
Okay.
by all means.
All right, let's see, where do I want to start? Oh, what? No. Did we start yet?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you're done.
So first you were talking about the exceptional difficulty of making these things. I think it's pretty hard to make something else that's conventional. Let's see here, Shenmue cost $75 million, didn't work out. Guess where Shenmue is right now? It's below my foot. So there's one thing to disprove your argument. The second thing is, you're saying that if we expand the, what?
I think
You're
you're
you're supposed to be positing questions to them. The rebuttal comes later.
Okay. All right, let me ask you a question. You said that the industry at large would suffer with the adaptation of the episodic format. Could you please tell me what kind of games Big Huge were working on, 38 Studios was working on, Zipper Interactive was working on.
No.
None of those, none of those were episodic. So what I'm trying to point out is it's already suffering without the adoption or broadening of the episodic format.
So you want to make it worse?
So you're saying that the fact that
It's
some
already.
I don't see how that's directly relevant to episodic gaming.
No, I'm saying that episodic gaming would not make it worse. It's already as bad as it could possibly be. People are being fired for doing a good job.
So,
The format wouldn't affect that.
yeah, but that doesn't,
Also, you're talking about keeping people's attention. Do you know how long the average attention span is?
No.
5 seconds.
based on what?
Where are your facts?
Based on what I was told by a science person. Anyway.
Thank you.
Anyway, so you kept bringing up Half-Life 2. What does that have to deal with the weaknesses of the format and not the inability of Valve to release things timely? Does that have anything to do with the format being a bad idea?
Well, I think Valve has already proven itself to be an exceptional gaming
I'm
company.
going to cut you off right there.
I mean, it produced one of the most popular PC
You
games.
stop, you have to stop. You
Yeah,
have to stop.
If the questioner cuts you off.
And how many of you here have completed and finished The Walking Dead? That's one. Okay. So you said that episodic games cannot lead to more thoughtful experiences, correct?
1 minute
No.
remaining.
You said it rages against the.
You
don't have to
were
answer
saying,
this.
all right, you were saying non-episodic games
Say
can be
that.
thoughtful. Right. Anyway,
Well,
are you aware that in The Walking Dead, you at one point have to make the decision between ending this man's son's life after seeing his wife killed in front of him, or making him do it?
Are you aware how
Do
many
you-
breaking glitches are in The Walking Dead?
All right, tell me what they
You
are.
want specifics? You want specifics?
Tell them
That's
your
what I
experience,
just
John.
asked.
I will tell you my experience. I could not progress in the game in episode 3 when I was walking along the train rail to go get the map because this camera would look all the way to the sky, so I couldn't even see where I was
Okay,
going.
and couldn't
And I
that
completely-
just as easily happen in a non-episodic game?
Okay, but in the episodic gaming format, they don't have time to go back and fix that because I was looking at the
Yes, they do.
episode.
The likelihood of it happening in an episodic game is far greater
Yeah.
than one that has years, because they have more time to develop.
But they're developing less, so they have more time to focus on the little that they have.
Done!
Charge!
Like, what is
It's the iPad.
It's the second way, okay.
Thank you, Andre.
Thanks, Andre.
What's next? Negative rebuttal? Oh, no.
Affirmative rebuttal.
Okay.
You have 4 minutes.
The affirmative gets to rebut.
You wanna do some
Who's got the rebuttal? Who's the butt? And that's when you can directly respond to their arguments. How much time does he have, Kurt?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Do you want to take any time to prepare anything? Because you have 3 minutes to disperse throughout the entire.
Give me the whole 3 minutes, actually.
Does my team want me to take time so they can discuss what they think I should? Are you sure? Are you really sure? All right. So according to our opposition, they have not told me specifically why the episodic format can cause anything bad. They have basically stated that things that could happen in non-episodic games happen in these games, which is redundant because games aren't going to work 100% of the time. They've also repeatedly mentioned Half-Life 2's failings, which is not the fault of the format, it is the fault of Valve software taking forever to do anything. They have also told me that episodic would make this entire industry suffer. That's impossible. It's suffering worse than you can imagine, especially in the mainstream. We've had a recent studio here close 2 times in 1 year, and they were not developing an episodic formatted game. Episodic formatted games would actually lessen that happening because it would, I got distracted. It would be less money up front for them to develop the first pilot episode, and less money for the consumer to spend up front for the first episode. If they don't like it, we move on to another idea. No one loses their jobs, and no one's lost $60 worth of money. It was also established in their rebuttal that they said that spending piecemeal for each episode would lead it to being more expensive, but that's actually a fallacy. The Walking Dead has a season pass that allows you to buy all of the episodes, which if you bought them individually would actually cost more than the season pass, and the season pass actually costs less than $30, which is less than half the cost of a full price game. So it's cheaper up front, and also The Walking Dead, the critical reception it's received can speak for itself. It's one of the greatest games I've played, with one of the greatest narratives and storytelling and character building I've seen, and it's led me and many others to ask questions that they never had to ask before about what's right and what's wrong. Most games that aren't episodic can't even make me give a shit about the people that are doing stuff, man. Like I'm playing Halo 3, didn't really care. Didn't feel any impact. Oh, he's going to sleep at the end of the game? Wow.
Spoilers.
That's so horrible. Whereas in The Walking Dead, oh God, the main character has gotten bitten by a zombie. Should we cut off his arm where he got bit so he can survive for a few more hours to go rescue this little girl that he found at the beginning of the game? And she sees her parents dead right before he dies, and then at the very end, he asks her to kill him? Is that not thoughtful? Can you say any other game before that has had anything even approximating that? No. Rest my case, actually. That's it.
All right, thank you, Andre.
We'll take our minute 30.
All right, another minute 30.
Very good.
When I said you have not played it.
I know, right? Here's the end of the game.
Or is it?
After a while, it's your own fault.
I mean, Halo 3 I would agree with.
1 minute
Walking Dead.
remaining.
I don't know.
Nothing does Walking Dead, man.
Play the game? Why not? You have an iPad. You can play it on your iPad for $15. You can get the first episode for free, actually, on the iPad, yeah. Although it's an iPad 2, right? I'm saying it was built with the iPad 3 in mind. So that's why.
If you go buy an iPad 3, then you get the Walking
Then it's
Dead.
free.
Then it's
You
free.
spend $700.
It still plays on the iPad 2, which is not as great as it does on the iPad 3.
That's basically what you do.
Yeah, you can buy it on Steam. Season pass is $22. It's pretty worthwhile, especially now that you know the end of the story.
Yeah. That way when you get there, there are no surprises. Cool.
They'll be surprised after the credits, though.
I don't know why that's not.
Fine.
Alright, guys.
All right, who's your, was it rebuttal?
And crystallization. This is your last thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's John
Rebuttal and crystallization from John Whitfield.
You got 6 minutes as soon as you
That's a
start
great
talking.
face, John, please. All right. Okay. Quiet. Abigail.
So, guess what? I'm not going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you some cold, hard facts. If you're a responsible consumer, first of all, you'll read a game review before you buy a game in the first place, and then you won't have a horrible game that you just spent $60 on. Just have to get that out of the way. And secondly, spoiler alert, man, that's awful what you just did. That was really bad. But yeah, crystallization. Let me get to what I really should be talking about. I'm going to keep this short and sweet for you guys. I'm just going to talk about the main points that we had really quickly. First of all, we said that it's awful, the awful game scheduling that happens when you try to do episodic gaming. The reason we brought up Half-Life Episode 2, Part 2 in the first place I can't even keep track of how many there are anymore. It's because of how inconsistent they've been with their scheduling. We don't know when the next part of the game is going to come out, if it ever comes out. Probably not. It's awful. And even The Walking Dead, Game of the Year, they had some game scheduling issues. I don't know if you all remember that. But they promised the third episode was going to be coming out for some time before it actually did. And that happens with just about every episode. Even the Sonic the Hedgehog part, 4? I think it was. They even had game scheduling issues with that. I don't know any notable developer who puts out an episodic game that has actually stuck to the schedule they set out to do fully. And these are notable game developers, so if indie game developers attempt this and it backlashes on them, they're pretty much going to be out of luck. Moving on. It cheapens the game quality, the experience, the immersion. When you're playing a game and you want to get into it and then it just cuts off, to be continued, pay $9 more. What is that? What are we doing here? This isn't a television show, this is a game. We want to play the game. And also, you can't go back. It's like you can't really go back and play an episodic game over again because of